Hey, this is Nicole Kelly, host of Disarming Disability. Thanks for listening to the following show on Public House Media.
Strike three, you're out.
Welcome back to a brand new episode of Caught Listening, the baseball game that goes beyond the white lines. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting as always as part of the Public House Media Network. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, of course, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, basically wherever you get your podcasts. But you can also find us on publichousemedia.org, all one word, and check us out there as well as the other great podcasts you can find here on Public House Media. Nearing the end of April, which means we are nearing what would have been the end of the first full month of baseball. And, this is kind of an interesting time right now, especially to have this discussion that we're going to have. We've been trying to find ways to keep baseball in the mix, keep baseball in our lives. And one of those ways is to talk jerseys and baseball jerseys. And it's kind of interesting that now you're starting to see a lot of NFL teams rebrand their jerseys. So we're almost kind of apropos here on the show, but we're looking forward to talking about those all here today. The best ones, the worst ones, some of the craziest ones, some of our favorites as well. And we're going to do that with Joe Rivera, MLB writer for the Sporting News. Joe, kind enough to give us some time here this week on the show. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you for having me on. Excited to talk some jerseys with you.
Yeah, and first and foremost, before we get into all this, how are you doing? How you, your loved ones, family, friends, everything that's going on right now. I know it's a strange world that we're living in, but how are you doing?
Oh, Chris, I really appreciate that. I live up here in New Jersey. I'm about a half-hour train ride from New York City. So, we're kind of at the middle of it, right? I mean, New York got hammered pretty bad, and then that all spread to New Jersey. And I want to say we're upwards of around 47,000 cases in the state now. My town had one of the highest concentrated cases in the state. But, as long as we've all been following, my wife and I, we've been following the CDC guidelines, masks everywhere, gloves were needed. Head to the supermarket once every couple weeks if you absolutely have to go, staying inside. So, yeah, it's been pretty difficult, not going to lie. I like getting outside. I miss being at the ballpark for sure. Yeah. But, until we get the all clear, until we get the go ahead, that's just the way of life right now.
100%. And obviously it's the easiest way to get back to normal is by following all of those guidelines. Well, it's interesting, to talk about jerseys here, because you wrote about this last month for Sporting News. You actually were ranking all 30 major league teams in their jerseys for 2020. And I thought it was interesting. The first line right out of the gate is what makes a good uniform. And that's something that we talk about a lot on the show, whether it be, the last couple of weeks we've talked about baseball video games and books, movies, all that other stuff. And that's the first question that we ask and that we talk about is what makes a good whatever. So what is it that makes a good jersey in your mind?
I think it's different for every sport, Chris. It really is. I think you look at Major League Baseball, and they're in a pretty good spot because unlike the NFL, unlike college sports, even the NHL, where you can kind of take risks with a lot of teams as far as jersey design goes. In Major League Baseball, you can't really take a lot of risks because it's just, it can be tough on the eyes, right? I mean, you look at the Diamondbacks uniforms when they redesign those. I mean, that's the one that everybody's going to point to, right? Like, I can appreciate that Arizona wanted to go a little fashion forward with their look and, really give them a signature flavor, but sometimes it just doesn't look great, right? So I think, depending on the sport you're looking at, but specifically baseball, I think the traditional look is always a little bit better. I think we've seen some bad uniforms through the years. I mean, not really uniforms that stick around. Sometimes they experiment like the turn ahead the clock nights that they did in the 90s and, things like that. But I think when you look at the uniforms top to bottom in Major League Baseball, they're all pretty simple. I mean, there's not a lot of fluff about them. A lot of teams rely on red and blue, but, beauty's in the eye of the beholder too, so I think that, I look at the Braves uniforms as one of the more meh uniforms in Major League Baseball, but somebody might love them. So it really depends how you look at it, Chris. I don't really think there's a set formula, but I think in Major League Baseball, the more traditional you look, usually the kind of better a kit looks as a whole.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I love looking at your list here of the top 30 because when I look at yours compared to ones that have been done in the past, yes, in your top 10, you have some of the more classic ones or the more, the ones that people are used to seeing. But at the same time, you have some of the jerseys that other people rank quite high in the middle or lower tiers. For example, the two teams that I really know, you talked about the Braves, but the two teams that I really notice are the Cardinals and the Reds that you have at 16 and 20 respectively in terms of their jersey styles, not to mention the Tigers. A lot of people love the Old English D there at 25. So, I mean, you're beauty in the eye of the beholder, but what about those jerseys specifically for you?
Chris, I think that like I mentioned, when you look at a uniform, it's what everybody wants it to be, right?
Right.
Whether you like those traditional looks or not, I think that, for me, a uniform like the Cardinals, or the Reds, I think you can take a little bit more risk. I know that having one singular look pretty much for the entirety of their history, it's going to be traditional, and that's what baseball is, right? It's traditional. Right. Their fans are traditional. They like that conservative look a lot of times. So, but I think that you can push it forward a little bit more. I don't really think that, obviously there have been different iterations of the Cardinals, the Birds on Bat logo. That's obviously changed a little bit throughout the years. The Reds have always had their C. They've always had, their baseball logo on the side, but I think you can take a few more risks. I don't really think there's anything wrong with having, another alternate look or pushing the design forward a little bit when it comes to a uniform, as long as it keeps the spirit of what's really happening there, right? As long as it keeps that tradition. So, I don't know, man. It's all subjective, right? I think that's the secret to these rankings, right? Everything is, there's always going to be design elements of it, right. Font size and spacing between letters. Certain things that you learn in school that is going to be picked up by the professionals. But if I'm just looking at a uniform, if I think it's sexy or not, that's just my opinion. I know other people disagree, but I just looked at those uniforms. I said they're a little bit boring for me, and that's why I knocked them down.
Well, but no, and I don't disagree with you on that, because I love some of the ones that are pushed a little extra to the edge, and that make it a little bit more interesting. And I was kind of shocked and surprised, but also happy to see where you have, the Pittsburgh Pirates at number 12 and how sleek their look is, the Mariners with what they've added in with the teal at number 9, and then the Brewers up there at number 2, with the Padres right behind them at 3, the new look for the Brewers, which I know some people don't like, some people love, but, I do like this idea of maybe changing it up and being a little, I don't know what the word, maybe a little extra for those jerseys.
Right. And Chris, let me tell you, I look at the Brewers uniforms, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? The Brewers uniforms, they did that redesign, and I'm like, I love their blue, their away blue that they're going with, or their alternate blue, top with the yellow Milwaukee across the front. You look at their home uniforms where they have the cream, the off-white coloring in the uniform, which is exemplary of the cream bricks that Milwaukee is known for. Mm-hmm. So it gives them a certain signature flavor too. But, even with the logo that they reintroduced, the throwback ball and glove logo that everybody loves. I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that it's probably the best, if not one of the best logos in all of sports, design there. So they bring that back too. And you look at these uniforms, the Brewers uniforms, and it keeps the spirit of what the Brewers are. It doesn't go too over the top. It gives them a nice color palette. They're nice on the eyes. They're easy on the eyes, but they push forward the design while also giving them a little bit of a signature. So, I look at them. Obviously, you mentioned the Mariners. I've always liked what the Mariners have done with their uniforms, especially their alts, with the cream, the off-white and the gold, trim around the lettering. I think those are gorgeous uniforms. And the Pirates who brought back, or brought a new look with the black and the gold lettering across the front. I think that those are gorgeous too. So yeah, like I mentioned, I think that there are ways that you can push the envelope a little bit when it comes to design, but also keep that tradition there. And I think that those three, specifically, like you mentioned, Chris, are really, really up there.
I think one of the things that's so important or so exciting about jerseys in general, whether it be baseball or whether it be across sports, but it's more prevalent in baseball, and you talked about it with Milwaukee and the cream color, is how the jersey represents the city that team is a part of. You have in here, talking about the Red Sox, the lettering is definitively Boston. Absolutely. That lettering you can only find when talking about the Red Sox and Boston. Pittsburgh what I love about them as a sports city in general is that every single franchise in Pittsburgh has black and gold as that color scheme, and that is definitively Pittsburgh. Same thing with some of these other teams that you mentioned, obviously Milwaukee, Seattle. It's just definitive of their city. How important is that when you look at something and go, you know what? Yep, that's Boston, that's New York, that's Seattle, that's LA.
Oh, that's everything. That is absolutely everything with the uniform, because you want it to be representative of your city, right? I think that's what everybody wants, right? I think that's what fans want. Obviously you're always going to have transplant fans across the country, growing up fans, of teams on the West Coast when you live on the East Coast and all that. But I think all teams always want that signature, right? They always want that signature color style, or they always want, you look at some of the New York area teams, right? The Knicks, the Mets, and the Islanders all have orange and blue as their primary color schemes. So, I think that when you see things like that, when you see that, it's really franchises that embrace the towns that they're in. And I think that's so very, very important. It really is. I think that's what every team kind of strives for, whether they add little nods. I can speak to, I've done a lot of NFL uniform stuff lately. A lot of these NFL teams too, they have, like the Falcons' new uniforms, they have ATL across the chest because they wanted to keep it close to the heart, So I think every team is really looking for that. They're always looking for that signature to try and add that flavor, to their town, to try and represent their people better. And I think a lot of teams have done a better job of that in recent years.
It's one of the really cool things about it, and 100%. I love the way, especially when teams do that, and they stick with their. It's almost more indicative than the actual name of the team. Like for instance, what does Red Sox have to do with Boston? Who there is a story behind it, but that jersey represents Boston just as much as the team does. We're talking with Joe Rivera here, MLB writer for Sporting News, talking about baseball jerseys, and I do have to be completely honest. This whole topic. Very good friend of mine that we've had on the show before, and I've known him for about 12 years now. Joe Pantorno, a writer and sports editor for New York AM. He actually on Facebook was doing a jersey bracket during this whole time. Started with the NHL and now it is into Major League Baseball. So I got this idea to have a show about it similar to this. But one of the things, Joe, I think that is great that you talk about in here that you mentioned with a couple of these rankings is how the sponsorship element could impact some of these jerseys. Having that Nike swoosh now on the right chest, you specifically mentioned it with the Yankees and the Cubs and how that could impact how their jerseys look.
Right, and I think that's something that, and I've spoken with some people at Nike. I don't want to say that they're looking at it for future years, but I think that part of what, and this is from a Nike branding standpoint, but I think part of what they wanted to go for was baseball. Let's be honest, Chris, baseball's not overly sexy right now to a lot of the younger, it's just not to the younger crowd, right? And for whatever reason that might be, maybe it's too slow paced but you put that brand on the front of a uniform. It's not telling people that it's a Nike uniform, but it's showing kids like, hey, baseball players are Nike branded, and that's a cool thing. And for a kid that, he's maybe 15, 16 years old, getting his first job, has a few extra bucks in his pocket. Obviously, he's going to look at Nike sneakers, if they have that extra money. So I think that branding plays a lot for Nike specifically. And I think that does do something for Major League Baseball too. It really does. It shows kids that baseball is hip. Now, will they move the swoosh to the arm like Majestic had in years past, like Adidas had in years past? Yeah, I think it's certainly a possibility in the coming years. We'll see how the owners take to it in the next few years. I think part of it too is maybe Major League Baseball is looking at sponsorship ideas, kind of like what the NBA does now for future, having small sponsors on their uniforms. I think maybe owners are looking at that too as another revenue stream. So yeah, certainly it can definitely change the look of how a uniform looks. I know that Yankee fans are in total uproar about seeing that Nike swoosh at the front of the uniform, but I don't really think it's all that bad. It's all that to get upset about.
Well, that was my first thought too, was looking at it was going, okay, they're looking at it and the owners are saying, look what the NBA did. Look at what soccer has done in Europe for years. I mean, in European soccer, the club logo is the smallest logo on the jersey. You couldn't tell that, if the only way you tell that it's a Manchester City jersey is because it says Chevrolet across the front, not because it actually has, that thing on there. But it's interesting that you bring up, baseball not being sexy and whatnot, because other sports have found ways to try to make their jerseys and make their apparel sexy and new. We've seen it in the NFL with Color Rush uniforms. We've seen it in minor league baseball with all these crazy, wacky promotional jerseys that go on. Even the NBA doing some throwbacks every now and again. But do you foresee, or could there be any reason for Major League Baseball to maybe go a little extra crazy with something and maybe do a Color Rush style uniform? I mean, I love what they do with Players Weekend, and I think those uniforms look awesome. But could we see a Color Rush style in Major League Baseball? How do you think that would go over?
Man, it would go over terribly. I'll tell you that with fans. I just think that, we know this. We know that baseball is so uber traditionalistic, right? It's very conservative. I mean, fans are just very stuck in their ways, and that's just baseball fans. I think it's worse than, you don't want to say worse, but I think it's just more prevalent in baseball than it is in the NFL or the NBA, where the fans of those sports and those leagues are always kind of looking ahead. With baseball, I mean, you do something as change something so minor, you get everybody belly aching, right? That's just the way that the fans are. They're just so used to seeing things one way. I think, in years past, we've seen with the Players Weekend uniforms. I think this past season was a huge flub with the plain black and white uniforms.
Yeah, those were terrible. The ones before that, 2018, those ones were nice. The last year was awful.
Right. Yeah, like those are a lot of fun. Those are like the different colors, like Little League inspired. Yeah. Those are fun uniforms, right? And I think that there's certainly more room for that. I mentioned in the slide, I mentioned this before I put this ranking together. I mentioned this so many times, looking specifically at a team like the Yankees. They would absolutely benefit from having a third uniform in their rotation, right? And whether it's a Friday night solid blue top with the pinstripe bottoms and a white logo on the chest, that would be wonderful. Or maybe it's a Sunday uniform. Who knows? But they would absolutely benefit from something like that. And I think that the more Major League Baseball kind of starts to realize that the way that we present our sport and the way that we present our athletes, including what they wear on the field, is so uber important to reaching future generations, I think they're going to be more open to making those kind of changes in the future. We've already seen it a little bit, little by little with the Players Weekend stuff. I think you're going to see that a little more if the Pirates uniforms, Padres, and Brewers uniforms, the three teams that got big updates this offseason, if their new designs are indicative of what we might see in coming years too. I think that baseball is going to be in good hands when it comes to Nike.
Yeah, it just seems to be very strange. You're right. As traditional as baseball is, it really seems like there are four fan bases that could kind of, if they turn, so would the tide in terms of how these jerseys, and that's the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Cubs, and the Dodgers. It just seems like those four fan bases, you don't mess with the sanctity of those pinstripes, of the Red Sox home whites, those beautiful Dodgers, white uniforms and whatnot. So it'd be kind of interesting to see what would happen if the Yankees ended up with that alternate, because it could be fun. It could be good for baseball as well to see that, especially attracting younger crowds. We're talking with Joe Rivera, Sporting News Major League Baseball writer here, talking Major League Baseball jerseys. I want to get into some of like the history of these jerseys, and maybe not necessarily why they are the way they are, but just some of the better ones and some of the worst ones that we've seen. I've been going through and looking at a whole bunch of different ones, and a lot of the ones that jump up are everybody talked about the Astros jerseys that they had in the 70s and 80s, the like puke camouflage ones that they had.
Right.
But then I also look at, and I remember, the Chicago White Sox in the 70s, in the mid 70s, who had the shorts and the collared shirt. Where do you see some of these really, really, really terrible ones?
I think you look at a uniform like the Tequila Sunrise uniforms, which are those Astros uniforms from the 70s, which, you look at them now, and I actually kind of like them, but I certainly understand where fans would be back then, where it would be kind of assault of the eyes, right? But I think you mentioned those. I think the Devil Rays uniforms, and they were still the Devil Rays. Those are pretty ugly with like with the rainbow blue to green across the front. it just kind of looked. It kind of looked like it was done in like Microsoft Paint a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned the White Sox uniforms, which in the 70s with the shorts. everybody looks at those and kind of say these are the worst of the bunch. Which, I understand playing in shorts is kind of weird too, Major League Baseball, right?
Strange.
So I can certainly see that. And I mean, no disrespect when I say this. I think the Padres, I understand what the Padres do and their salute to service, their camouflage uniforms. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are pretty ugly, obviously, with Marine stationed out there, but those are pretty ugly uniforms too, to be honest. There's different ways you can go about it, I think, but those are really the ones that come to mind. I think when you look at other sports, there's certainly terrible uniforms, and they're like eras of terrible uniforms, right? But in Major League Baseball, when you have a bad uniform, it doesn't really last that long. And I think part of it is like, fans looking at a very traditional way where they just don't really want things to change, or whether it's teams realizing quickly that maybe this design isn't all it was cracked up to be. But there certainly have been bad uniforms in Major League Baseball history, but for the most part, I think that most of them have been pretty okay.
One of the things that I think is so intriguing is this love, especially when you talk about NFL uniforms, with powder blue. I mean, we all talk about the Chargers powder blue uniforms are arguably the best ever in the NFL. And then when you look in Major League Baseball, people go either way. When you look at the Phillies, the Royals, I believe it was the Cardinals even did a powder blue at one point. But it's just so strange how even the color contrast can be so definitive, specifically with I love the Royals blue. I love those. I love the Phillies ones that they did, the throwback uniforms with those powder blues. But where do you stand on the powder blue phenomenon?
I love powder blue as a concept. There are so many teams doing it this year too. I mean, the Rangers are one. Yeah. The Royals have their powder blue alternate. The Cardinals, I think, are bringing it back, or they brought it back for Saturday games. The Phillies, the Twins have a powder blue alternate this year. There are so many teams. The Blue Jays have a powder blue. Yep. So there are a ton of teams that are doing it. I have no idea why. It's probably the easiest color on the eyes, right? Like probably. It just looks, it's nice to look at. It's pretty to look at. But I don't really think we need to see every team. You're looking at like a third of the league now using powder blue uniforms. I just don't see it. And you look at like the Rangers lineup of uniforms now, they have like 6 different uniforms they can default to, and the powder blues being one. No team needs 6 uniforms. I know you play 162 games a year, guys, but we don't need 6 uniforms, and we don't need like 6 or 7 different colors on top of that. So, like I said, I love powder blue just as a concept. You mentioned the Chargers uniforms, and the new ones they released today are actually gorgeous too. And powder blue is still a primary uniform of theirs, but across Major League Baseball, it's something that's been there in the past. It's something that I guess is making a comeback now. I just don't see the reason for a lot of teams to be using it all the time.
It's so funny too. I've worked in baseball for about 10 years now, and it seems as though the players love this like sleek, almost black on black style for some of them. Not all of them, but it seems as though, and you're seeing that a little bit. I think it was Pete Alonso who wants the Mets to bring back their black uniforms. Where do you agree with Pete? I mean, because I actually love those black Mets unis.
Yeah, I'm a fan of them. It's funny because the Mets fan base seems very split. This is actually something I brought up to Mets fans, trying to dig through this a little bit and how they feel about those black uniforms. And a lot of them love that the late 90s, early 2000s era of Mets teams, right? And those black uniforms were very, very symbolic of those teams. So I think some of those uniforms are always going to have to do with nostalgia. But make no mistake, black is badass, right? I mean, we're talking Darth Vader. We're talking, these guys take the field. They look like Grim Reaper wearing black, on a Friday night. Like, it's intimidating, right? There's always a certain reason why black is used a lot, I think. So I'm a fan. I'm actually a fan of the Mets uniforms. They're black alternates. I hope they bring them back. And the Mets are a team that's had, 20, 25 different uniform variations over the last 35 years. They have a ton. They have a whole lot. So it definitely works better with some teams. I do think it works for the Mets. A team like the Marlins, though, I just don't see it. I mean, one of their uniforms is black with the blue and pink lettering on it. I was a fan of them when they came out, but for some reason it just doesn't pop on the field as much as you want it to when you look at it. So yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of black uniforms altogether in sports, baseball specifically. I think it's a pretty underutilized, to be honest, but as far as the Mets go, I hope they bring them back. And I think Alonso is really pushing hard to bring those uniforms back.
I certainly hope they do too. And I mean, again, there are some the Marlins, not huge on. I actually like the whites with like the rainbow Marlins across, like the crazy colors, the blue, orange, and yellow. I like that a heck of a lot better when they started that. We're talking with Joe Rivera here, Major League Baseball writer for Sporting News. Your favorite Major League Baseball jersey of all time, and why?
Of all time, man, wow. There have been so many. It's keeping with the Mets. They actually had in the mid 2000s there, they had a cream, they had like an off-white, uniform that they used that I really, really liked. I thought those were just, for some reason, they were just sharp. And I think that the cream color, the off-white color that teams kind of use here and there, I know that obviously the Giants use it. But I think that that's a color that they should bring back. There's something very soothing about seeing uniforms like that. And I'll tell you what, I am a huge fan right now and I put them number one on my ranking, but I am a huge fan of the current, A's alternate uniforms, the Kelly green with the script lettering across the front. I mean, I think those are very, very sharp. They, along with the white pants and obviously the white cleats that they're known for. I think those are just fantastic. But, those Mets, I really like those Mets cream uniforms though, man. There was just something about them that were really nice. So those are definitely up there for me.
Yeah. For me, it kind of goes back to that nostalgia thing that we were talking about. I love the old school teal Mariners jerseys. I love those jerseys. I have no idea, but I think it's because, there's this picture in my head of Ken Griffey with his hat on backwards in a teal jersey. And like, that's the epitome of cool in the 90s, like for baseball kids. So I absolutely love those teal, and I love anybody who throws teal. Like I love when the Marlins had a little bit of it. And I don't know. I love the Diamondbacks teal and purple that they had in the early 2000s. I love those jerseys as well.
Right. And a team like the Diamondbacks, and I mentioned this before, but a team like the Diamondbacks who don't really have, they don't have a tradition that runs obviously 80 years deep because they're still a fairly new franchise. And the same with the Marlins, where you can afford to take certain chances with your uniforms. Which is why I think like the Diamondbacks, they have I think they have 6 or 7 different colors in their color palette right now with their uniforms. It's just too damn much, man. I mean, that's a lot of freaking colors to stick on one uniform. And I think the same can kind of be said about the Marlins, where they've tried different looks through the years, right? They all haven't really worked, but they certainly have the town behind them. I mean, you look across town, you look at the Dolphins, right? And the Dolphins perfected. I think when it comes to color scheme, when it comes to personality, when it comes to representing your town, team nickname, the Dolphins have the perfect package to me. And I think that that's something that the Marlins can kind of take from too, where they can work with different colors. They don't really have a set color. They had that teal green that they used for a while, and now they're using, the pink and the blue and the different neon colors. But I think that they could take a page from the Dolphins book and try and bring over some of that green, that light green and that blue, and those different colors would kind of work for them. So, I mean those teal uniforms that you mentioned too, the Mariners ones are really nice, but I think that there are certain teams and can certainly go back to the original point. There's certain teams that can definitely go a little bit more fashion forward with what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. We've come to the time of the show where we let our listeners be a part of it, play a little game called Pepper. They submit questions or thoughts, and then you and I just kind of give our quick-hitting answers like the game Pepper that hopefully you all played when you were kids. I don't know if they still allow kids to play Pepper anymore on baseball fields. But so, Joe, first one coming in here is from Eric. Should we bring back turn ahead the clock night uniforms at any point?
As long as they don't look as bad as the Pirates ones did back when they first introduced that, man. I mean, I think everybody's got I'm sorry if I'm going long here, but I think everybody's got a certain view of what the future looks like. I just hope it don't look like that. Let me tell you, I would rather look like 2015 out of Back to the Future Part 2 than whatever they were wearing that night.
Yeah, they were very strange. I liked some of them. I was never a huge fan of them. I mean, I think the biggest one that I liked was probably, I don't know, maybe the Mariners. Probably again, I don't know, but it's just so funny when you Google that. One of the first things I get is Johnny Damon in this stupid gold-chested, teal-sleeved. It just looked bad. So I'm out on turn ahead the clock night. I think I'm out on that one. All right. Brandon here, which classic team would you give a new look to? which classic uniform would you give a new look style? I think you kind of answered this a little bit earlier.
I don't know if there's any that I would really change outright. I think the Cardinals, like I mentioned, could maybe use a little bit of an update there, whether it's maybe adding some blue into their color palette on the uniform. I think that would actually help them a little bit. I understand they're the Redbirds, don't get me wrong. But, like I mentioned with the Yankees, I think you could definitely give the Yankees an alternate uniform. I don't see why not. I mean, for a team and for a franchise that loves their global enterprise, right? They always mention that they're a global enterprise. You hear that as money printing machine, right? I mean, these are the Yankees. They love their money. There's nothing wrong with introducing a third uniform. I think it's a quick way to make a few more bucks.
Yeah, no, I think that would be the one team that I would go for. I would definitely, and again, listeners of the show know I grew up a Red Sox fan, and so I loathe pinstripes with everything I can. But I think updating that uniform, giving it kind of a new twist, I think would be really, really fun and great for that organization. Last one here. Thoughts on the San Diego Padres Friars logo, and should they bring it back?
No. I mean... I know that baseball is home to so many different like cartoon logos, and the Swinging Friar is an interesting one, right? I just don't know. There's something very like it's weird because their baseball's kind of going back to those cartoonish logos, right? Like the Orioles ditched their Sirius Cal Ripken era logo for the cartoon one maybe 5 or 6 years ago, right? So they went back to it. And other teams are, they still embrace mascots thoroughly, but I don't know. I'm not really sure that I'm down with the Swinging Friar much. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the little tubby guy, bald guy, it's all fun, but I'm not really sure that especially with their new uniforms, I don't really think they need to feature it anymore.
Yeah, I love the new uniforms. I love, going back to that color scheme a little bit more, but, that logo, I don't know. There's something too cartoony about it for me, for baseball that I just,
maybe,
and I love
maybe
it.
if they gave it an update, it would work. I don't think in its like current, iconic, I guess, look, it would suit the team.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on that one. He's Joe Rivera, Major League Baseball writer, Sporting News, talking MLB jerseys with us. Joe, we really do appreciate the time. Let the fans know where they can follow you and get more of your great work.
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Rivera SN. As always, my writer page on Sporting News, always got some good stuff there. Not a lot of baseball happening right now, obviously, but hopefully when that gets kicked off again, I'll be in full gear for that. But that's where you can find me.
Really appreciate it, Joe. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll be back at the ballpark pretty soon.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, it's Joe Rivera, the Sporting News, joining us here on Caught Listening to talk baseball jerseys. Look, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the classics like I talked about. I think there are 4 fan bases that could really turn the tide in terms of how truly updated, quote-unquote, Major League Baseball uniforms get. But the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Dodgers, they're classic. They're sleek. They're beautiful. They don't need to be changed. But I think it could be great for the future of baseball if you get an alternate in there every now and again. I was never a big fan of the Red Sox alternate greens, but I think you bring some of those back and bring something a little different. It could work out pretty well. Don't forget, you guys can be a part of the show. Just find us on social media. Search Caught Listening by Public House Media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can email the show, caughtlisteningphm@gmail.com. Subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm Christian Heimall. Till next time, you have been caught listening.